Hello. Um, this is I'm Drew Kopp. This is part two of a conversation between Kurt Hill, Carolyn White, and Michael E. Zimmerman. And in part one, it was a wide-ranging conversation, and it began to and it ended with a discussion about artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence and AI and AGI. And so in the interim, Michael's had some observations and thoughts he wanted to also address. So we're going to begin with what Michael would like to explore, and then we'll continue the conversation in this part two of turning toward being the podcast.
Fabulous.
So, Michael, take it away.
First of all, it's great to be back. I had a great time chatting with you all last time. As you said, Drew, who could believe it was a month ago? And second, Kurt and Carolyn, you guys are terrific conversational partners. And without the three of you, we wouldn't have a very interesting conversation. It was just me babbling on. But you mentioned, Carolyn, a moment ago that your son had done some work studying Krishnamurti's writings and so on. I actually saw Krishnamurti in 1982 at Ojai, California. He was an old man and a really interesting figure. Now, this is the time when I was deeply into Asian spiritual traditions, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan and Theravada Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on. And one of the things that's particularly attractive to was Zen. Werner Erhard was attracted to Zen. A lot of his work was informed in ways by that, and so is Heidegger. He got quite interested in Buddhism in his way. And one of the great practices in the Zen tradition, as you all have heard, is the koan practice, Koan. Koan is a kind of parable wrapped up into a question, and that your job is to figure out, well, how would you answer this question? And one of the frustrating things about a koan is that typically you can't come up with it right away. In fact, it may take years and years. I'm going to give you an example of the one I finally got. It's in the introduction or the afterward to your wonderful book. And it goes like this. The Zen master asks the Zen student, "Show me your original face before you were born." Right? You know, that's a tough one, right? Come on. I mean, so for a long time, I would bring this or that. This question would come back to me every once in a while. I'd be mulling it over. I'm talking decades. And one point of saying, well, maybe it's who I am floating around in the Bardo, in between birth and death. You have that in Tibetan Buddhism, you have that time and waiting to get reborn and this and that. And it wasn't very satisfying. But then one day it came to me. I had a little awakening, and that was, show me your it's all about emphasis in the sentence. Show me your original face before you were born. Now, who is the you? This tangled up, messy, craving ego, fearful and forgetful and finite. And, so that's the question. Who were you before all that got started? What's the infant, the child about? They're full of wonder, playfulness. They're inventive. Yeah, they reinvent everything. Because they've never done it before, but they're little inventors, and watching children is fantastic to see how they're doing it. But then you can see it in their first grade photographs from school. They already got the little crow's feet showing up here around the eyes as they're getting anxious, comparing themselves to other kids and adults, and then they're being born as their self, their chess piece in the game of life, I guess. And a lot of what these meditation practices, and really these are not restricted to Asian traditions. I mean, there's analogous kind of practices you'll find in Jewish studies and various kinds in Christian monasticism and elsewhere. But it's all about paying attention to the present moment and being moment by moment engaged in what you're doing. instead of going off in other directions. And the biggest challenge for human beings is what they call in the Asian traditions their monkey mind. That is a tendency for you just to start talking to yourself about something else instead of what you're doing. And so that was one of the big challenges I had when I first encountered meditation practice and yoga. I mean, I was a neurotic mess, multiple dialogues going on and no center. But the meditation practice really provided a center where some quiet could occur. And that's why I developed a practice of meditating before every class. I think we talked about that last time. But I just wanted to start out with that as a way of beginning the conversation. Your comments and questions are welcome, and we
Well,
can also go into another
I just what's there for me is as a sort of a central component of anything that would be ontological at all is the first person lived experience of what's being dealt with right now, rather than theories and associations and all of the stuff that are past. It's sort of past derived formula answers. Oh, it's like that, or which I'm kind of doing even right now by associating what you're saying with,
right.
Oh, that's just like being, as lived experience, or what might be called on the court versus being in the stands. That's where the monkey mind is. And and I wonder, and I'm just present to like the inescapability, of us as a you. I'm already a you. I'm always finding myself starting as a you, as an I, dealing on the court in monkey mind land, attempting at any moment, perhaps to discover for myself my as lived, what it is, the you that I was before you was born.
Yeah.
And thanks for that. And
Well, the you before your ego started developing.
yeah.
It's not before birth.
Right.
And this reminds me of one of Jesus's parables. You have to become again as a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means to have that openness, that freshness, the presence that characterizes someone who's really awake. And the stuff that gets in our way subsequently is really, as you were just describing it, really difficult. This reminds me of, again, I go back to the training and that in the 80s and then later the forum and so on. It was really interesting to watch people holding the microphone. Now, these are the heroic people up there talking about their stuff, their issues, all right? And then they'll be saying this and that. They're dancing around. Whatever it is, it's really up for them. What's really at stake here? So they're doing this, they're doing that. It's kind of like, and then at some point, and the skill of the people facilitating this up front comes out, and finally they get to a point where they stop. The person stops, and it's like there's a drop, and they've entered now the stuff, the messy stuff, the source of the sadness, the source of the regret, the longing, the if only, and they're not dancing around it. Now they're into it. Then the tears come, and then the confession about the waste of their lives, about how they have misspent so many opportunities, about how their unwillingness to get into that uncomfortable zone cost them friendships, undermined their relationships, and so on. Man, this was such big stuff to see someone else doing, because it was an invitation and reminder about me and my stuff and how I had been dancing too much around it. And you have to drop into it, and it's a scary moment. So that's my thought about that.
Right. With no guidance and no map.
No maps.
For just being with.
That's right. Being with it, moment by moment.
Right.
Yeah. Now that's one of the things, and this gets into our whole, the AI issue, but AI, AGI, and all this kind of stuff really is dependent on, literally dependent on our practices associated with computers and smartphones. that's where these new inventions get all their data, is from what we're doing with our personal computers and our phones. The data generated through using Google and all kind of other things, this becomes the raw material for developing these chat boxes. Now, one of the things that, and hey, I've got an iPhone, I got Kindle. I mean, I read all kind of stuff on there. But I realize that there are limitations to that and real problems with it, since it's an excellent way to get distracted. You know, you never have to worry about being alone, or maybe you're going to fall into that uncomfortable zone and actually have to feel something, something painful or scary, right? You can always pick up your cell phone and get a book going, or check the news, email, text, TikTok, whatever. And so this reminds me of a I think it's from Pascal. Now, Pascal was a French philosopher back in the 1500s, late 1500s, early 1600s. He said that one of the reasons people envy a king is not just because of power and wealth. It's because he's always capable of being distracted. And he has people around him who have a full day of stuff the king has to do. Your Majesty, this morning you're going to get this, and then we have to meet with so and so, and the ambassador there, and this, and so he's constantly distracted. He doesn't actually have to be anywhere in that's close to his own issues, because it's always externally being organized by his retinue of servants and ministers who are making sure that he's occupied. Now, we're all kings now. It used to be just television, right? But TV was a clunker compared to your smartphone. And so the possibility of spending, imagine, a week away from your cell phone, that's got to be tough. I've actually had my Buddhism students do that. One of their options for their paper was to spend a week without using their cell phone. Now, they could have it on for an emergency call, but they couldn't actually use it. I didn't say they couldn't use their computer. It was a cell phone. Yeah. And I had to write a paper about it. That was their term paper. What were the challenges? You know, this is the end of the semester. You know, how would from a Buddhist perspective, how would your effort at going without a cell phone be assessed? How did you do? Why did you peek at it? And so on. Very interesting. But anyway, it seems to me that for those of us living at this moment historically, I think particularly of our young people who have not known a world before this, all of us were alive before the advent of smartphones and the media associated with them. But for them in particular, the opportunity to have some quiet away from these devices is enormously important. And I think not just in terms of pedagogy and in terms of psychological health, the creating opportunities for young people to be alone and with each other without any of these devices for stretches of time would probably be a very good idea. I don't know how to set that up, but that up.
Well, yeah, because the question is you know, can ontological inquiry reach the world of total technological immersion? You know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You got to make that your second issue's topic.
Okay, good.
But you know, what is it like to being in the world with the smartphone? Right now we're adding chat box and stuff to all this. But what is it like to be in the world with the smartphone, as opposed to what it was like before? Now, those of us old enough to remember that, Kurt, what about you? What was it like for you before the smartphone? And has your life been changed in some way by it, for good and ill?
Yeah. Boy, it's funny.
Hard to remember.
It's hard to remember.
It's hard to remember.
You know, I mean, I spent all my formative years pre-smartphone. I mean, pre-cell phone. I remember the first smartphone that I encountered. I think it was in 1991 or 92, and managing an event, and I needed to call into the office, and one of my techie friends had a cell phone, and it was the first time I'd ever used one. I think it was 91 or 92. There certainly was there was an opportunity to be not so immediately connected to everyone and everything. Right. So now leaving the house without the smartphone is almost an act of courage.
Yeah, that's right.
You get a half a block away and you realize you don't have your smartphone. You have to go back and get it.
It's like your blanket when you're a 2-year-old, right?
Or you're naked without the damn thing.
Right.
So it's an interesting question, and it's definitely altered and I would say our relationship to the world around us and how we participate in the world around us. And I'm struck by people walking down the street, staring at their smartphones, people at restaurants, a couple at a table next to you at a restaurant, and both of them are on their cell phones.
Right.
Shocking. It intervenes in the confront maybe of having to be with another human being that you're physically present to, because you've got
God knows, where you might actually have a conversation about something that's kind of difficult.
Right. And not to say that that's what was going on before the advent of the smartphone, but it certainly makes avoiding that sort of interaction so much easier. Everybody understands it's kind of the social norm. You're on your cell phones.
Yeah.
So, and I think it takes something, and it leads to kind of some question notes that I was taking in your conversation about meditation, the relationship between meditation and being, and artificial intelligence. I mean, I can't quite imagine the world where an AGI device meditates.
Right. It doesn't need to.
Well,
Not the kind of being.
Yeah, right.
Yet, anyway.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot there, and I think that in meditation, there's the opportunity to authentically confront being arising in a way that we ordinarily don't.
Right. Well, I absolutely well said. And let me just go back to what we were saying earlier about what was it like. Now, people won't believe this. Anybody under like 35 or 40 will not believe what it was like. First of all, you got mail once a day. No mail on Sunday. Second, long distance calls were really expensive.
Yeah.
All Bell Telephone controlled, AT&T controlled long distance. Right. I mean, you couldn't just call somebody, in California, unless you're ready to spend some money. And third, your distraction opportunities, even for TV, you had 3 channels plus PBS or something. I mean, and moreover, for a long time, there wasn't even a remote. You had to get up and go to the set to turn the channel. I mean,
I remember, Michael, I remember one of the early TVs where I had a cardboard shim that I would jam in behind the tuning dial because it wouldn't quite tune. So I have to fashion this way to make sure I was tuning to, CBS or whatever. So
right. That's right. So now here's the opportunity here was what? The opportunity was great stretches of time, right? In which perhaps you could do some work, actually apply yourself to the job you had, or if you're a student or a lawyer, get some good, or a mother really paying attention to her kids or what has to, whatever. Now, how did we do with that opportunity? What do people typically do? What did they typically do before this? Were people really focused and into their No. We were able to find distractions of other kinds.
Yeah.
For one thing, just daydreaming, talking to yourself, and so much of daydreaming, they've done studies, psychological studies, so much of daydreaming, is musing about the past, and if only, what if, if I had only, and so there's a lot of melancholy that goes along with that extra time. Now, this is one of the opportunities in meditation practice, since you're not just simply turned loose to melancholy remembering or anxiety ridden worries about the future, right? So you're never in the present, you're either in the past or future. Is a set of directions, and that is, as you're saying, Kurt, to be there moment by moment when things start arising for you, whether they're feelings or memories or thoughts about this or that. And the idea is that you note them, but you let them pass away.
Mm-hmm.
You learn to surf over what's arising instead of getting caught up in it. Now, that's a long-term practice. And to do a 10-day or 2-week retreat in one of these places, I mean, it is incredible, the spaciousness that can open up. So there's a kind of reminder then of the childlike mind when you're wide open and not brought down by our kind of neurotic thinking about how we're not worthy. Here I think then I mentioned it before we started talking, the imposter complex. Now, this has become a big thing in public discourse now. I see it now in various articles or wherever on the internet or in newspapers. And what's the imposter complex? You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
The imposter complex. I'll give you an example of it. I remember when I was a second semester grad student at Tulane in philosophy, I'm walking across the campus quadrangle with my guy, Ed Ballard, who turned out to be my dissertation director. And he was really, man, this guy was smart. And, he was trained, he knew Greek, and he was saying, he said, well, sometimes I have these ideas. I write them down in my philosophical notebook, and they may become a chapter or a, essay or something, article. So I'm walking along saying to myself, holy crap, philosophical notebook. I had no idea. I mean, I didn't have any, ideas spontaneously showing up. I mean, I was just desperate trying to keep up with day by day reading in my classes. And I had this terrible, it's the right word here, fantasy, a dark fantasy that any time now the graduate dean was going to come up from behind me and tap me on my shoulder and say, Mr. Zimmerman, I'm sorry, we have realized that you don't belong here. You don't really have what it takes to be a graduate student. And we're no longer going to have you at Tulane. I mean, that was my anxiety. Does any ring bells with anybody?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Constantly. Yeah.
Now, so again, that type of self-undermining is typical. Now, here's the thing. Now, you also know this. Those of us who've lived a long enough time, that's why you can't be killing yourself at 15 or 20. You just can't be doing that, because this is the danger of
Right.
of guns at home, for example, and easy ways to kill yourself, because everybody at 15 or 20 felt bad enough to check out. But you got to be able to get through those troughs, those dark times. And if you live long enough, you know that those dark times end and you come back to some kind of stable position in your life. But the challenge is how to persevere. You have to have some kind of willingness to stay in the mess.
And I think if I could interrupt you right there, because I think that's a really key thing, and it goes right to the implications of how we live our lives, right? I think most people get through that, but they don't get to that point that you're talking about, that mostly people end up, you could say, in that imposter syndrome for a large part of their life, or never attain any sort of being awake to, or noticing thoughts arising as simply thoughts arising, right? That mostly, I think, people live their life as though they are their thoughts.
Right. As if the thoughts were telling the truth about them.
Right, right. And you can see that play out, all, you know, from the grocery store to the federal government. I mean, you can just see that playing out now. So then I think a piece in there that's critically important is some sort of practice that has us continue to develop that work of noticing, of noting, of getting finer and finer distinctions of thoughts arising and returning us to being.
Yep.
So it seems to me that that whole endeavor of practice is a critical piece in what I think in the project of being human, we want to take on and foster. And in the endeavor of turning towards being, is it's not something that's going to happen just, you know, you wake up, you make a cup of coffee, and you turn towards being. Some sort of intentional practice.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, absolutely. Well, that reminds me of what went on in these trainings and the various workshops I was at, and that was observing one of these forum leaders, for example, working with someone who's, you know, got the mic and the mic is shaking and they never hold it up to their mouths, you know, but they stay with them.
Yeah.
So now I want you to tell me what you're feeling. Don't give me some discussion about something else. I mean, get close, get a little closer, you know, and they can create an opportunity for the drop. I mean, you can see the drop, and there's a kind of letting go of all these props that are holding you up from getting into the messy, sad, tragic, and also hilarious and weird aspects of ourselves. So it's terrific to watch that and to kind of try to do it with yourself in these workshops, to try to bring yourself into your present moment, to let who you are, your content show up, and to observe them without letting them grab you. In other words, you don't surrender your possibilities as a human being to this self-talk, which is usually about your inadequacies or the things you did wrong, or if only. Those drag us down and rob us of our power and our opportunity for vitality and so on. And those of us who've been in this kind of setting, in this experience, know that this really is an extraordinary experience to shed for a moment, for a little while, that all that stuff we carry around, this burden we have, and then to have this opportunity to take a step, to take a stand, to make a commitment. And without that opportunity to observe the process by which you drive yourself crazy and make yourself sad and impotent, really, in life, then you're just going to keep doing that, because repetition compulsion is what humans do best, I suppose. We keep doing the same thing, even though we know it doesn't work, but we do it anyway because we don't know an alternative. So this stuff, the mention you just made of practice, Kurt, that's such a powerful thing. And
right. And could you imagine in one of those trainings where someone at the microphone is really dealing with something really confrontational, what that would be like if in the assembled group at large, everyone had their cell phones, what they would be doing. Right? I mean, you just check right out of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Check the sports scores, check what the market, that's what would be going on, versus staying present through the discomfort of pressing through whatever's there between. Right. And I think about that meditating as well. Imagine, you're meditating you have this thought about whatever it is that you're thinking, and you grab your cell phone. Well, that's the end of your meditation practice right there.
Well, you discover that, that's another thing about the pre-cell phone era. You discover, I mean, you didn't really need the cell phone to get distracted. Just talking to yourself all the time about this or that, anything. But, I remember how often when you were an undergraduate, being an undergraduate, Drew, you're still into teaching undergraduates, but, these poor 19 or 20-year-olds roaring with hormones, right? They barely have anything under control, right? All they want to do is, jump in bed with somebody and get drunk or run around and raise hell, right? And they're supposed to be sitting here reading, but the text that they have no idea why it matters. And, I used to talk about this in my Buddhism classes. Look, have you ever had the experience? You've been reading the same frigging paragraph for an hour and a half, never getting even to the end of it.
It's called being an academic.
Words,
oh my God.
What a cell phone does, it provides you, you don't even have to do the work of talking to yourself. It'll even do that for you to distract you. It makes it takes the burden of even distracting ourselves away. Something else will do it for us. It's not like people before the cell phone were all always so.
Right. It's just
before I forget, I want to bring to a conclusion this point about feeling like an imposter. And this is where you have to have a commitment of a certain kind. Like, I'm going to graduate school, or I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to become an apprentice in some corporation, in the sense that I'm going to get in there and learn how to do this. Well, you have to make a commitment then, and just to keep going and have some kind of faith that something maybe will happen. And this happened to me after I got out of graduate school. After I got my PhD, I was a first-year professor. And guess what? I started having these philosophical brainstorms, just like my professor talked about. And what had happened was that I had amassed a critical mass of knowledge about philosophy and how all this stuff worked together, and different positions and the history of it, different views. And suddenly I was coming up with this stuff. Now, my experience of it was that I wasn't coming up with it. It was coming up. And my job was to stay with it. Let the words come out. Let the writing happen. Just get out of the way, right? And it would pour out. It wasn't like my ego was doing a lot of work here. It was on the sidelines. And the knowledge that I had accumulated, plus my own mental abilities, were able to produce articles and chapters and books and all this kind of stuff. And then I no longer felt like an imposter. But there's that stretch. Now, once in a while, I still feel like an imposter, but I think that's
well. We gotta talk about this a little bit here. This is great. Because my sort of where I go in what you're saying is that we think we normally relate to this. Like, in an everyday way, I'll make a commitment to be this, right? And then I'll try really hard to make sure that I do those things that I'm committed to. And that's I think our everyday way of dealing with that, making a promise, trying to do it, and failing a bunch of times, keeping our word. And then, but there's this other dimension that's sort of speaking in what you're saying, Michael, is that there's the possibility that there's a word that we are that even gave me what the commitment is that I'm saying that I'm committed to.
Right. Where does that come from? Right.
Yeah. Where does that come from? And maybe even when does that come from? And that's sort of, for me, that's like that's the locus of ontological inquiry that fascinates me and keeps drawing me in, which is, to what degree is everything that I take myself to be is what I call, just being downstream from the word that I am.
Okay, this is great. This is great, because did we talk last time about the time when I realized I was who I was?
I think so. In
junior high school or something. I'm
I don't recall.
I don't recall that. Yeah.
I mean, it was a powerful moment, and it really allowed me to, as you're suggesting, Drew, to say that. Well, I'm gonna try to do this, later on in life, So I'm walking down the hallway after school one afternoon at junior high school in Newcomerstown, Ohio. I must have been, 8th, 7th, or 8th grade, and building mostly empty, and all of a sudden I had this realization that I am me. In other words, I wasn't just kind of a blobby extended thing that was part of this family and school and stuff, but no, I was me. And that meant, I was going to have to take care of myself. I was going to, people grow up, and they get a job or they get married or whatever. And I was going to have to do that. And this was, I can't believe what a shift this created, because all of a sudden I realized I had to actually take charge of my life as best I was able to do it. And that meant, I was going to have to actually take school seriously more than I had, or if I was going to play football, well, I was going to have to, be a good football player as well as I could be, or whatever I was doing, something was now at stake. And that was my future as me. And I've talked to a lot of it. I've told this story to a lot of students. I haven't had a lot of students who had a similar moment, but it was a big moment for me. And that's what allowed me, is to go back to your point, Drew, of being able to what's the right word, to take a position about committing myself to achieving something if I were able to do it. And failing that, I remember I dropped out of my first year of graduate school. That was a big failure, I perceived on my part. Failure of my marriage, 7 years into my marriage, but that was just devastating experience. And really, it took me 10 years to recover from that, to allow myself to get remarried and so on. But yet I did, and I went back to graduate school. I got remarried because I had some sort of commitment to living my life as well as I was able to do it. And things worked out for me.
What are your thoughts about future you're living into, how it gives you who you're being in the present back then? And I know it's ultimately all speculation. And now, given what for so many people looks like a future of hopelessness, despair, things never changing. I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
Well, it's a good question. I'm sure there was a lot of despair during the Great Depression.
Yeah, right.
And when you get poverty so grinding that you can hardly carry on. That's extreme conditions. But just being an ordinary working person with the family and so on, earning enough to actually, be able to carry on a kind of normal poor life, that's a different kind of condition. We have people in New Orleans who are primarily the former, where they have access to some money, but so often it's from drug sales, robberies, and so on. And a lot of times they don't have any money, although everyone seems to have a cell phone. So even the poor now have cell phones, which is. And the other thing,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me add this too. Unlike previous eras, everyone today can afford clothes that make them look okay. No one's in rags. All right. So that the economic productivity has been a boon for in many ways. People can at least have the opportunity to look respectable, even if they're not behaving respectably, and so on. But here's something that has changed. It's a change in culture based on religion, right? Everyone was Jewish or Catholic when I was growing up. Catholic, Christian or Jewish. I was raised Catholic, and there were people who weren't, but it was taken for granted that there is some kind of higher power in the world who created the world, that your life is being assessed, and that there's maybe an afterlife, and that who you are and how you behave in life, there's a reckoning, and that now I'm not saying that this has to be heavy duty, But the
Yeah.
idea that there's some kind of a karmic domain in the world, they think about all the religious traditions in the world. For all of them, there's some kind of karma. It doesn't have the same name, but that how you exist in the world isn't just a matter of you. You have obligations. You're part of a larger world, and how you behave in this world, the misery you cause, the abandonment you affect by running out on your family, the misery you cause by this or that, your own self-destruction by drugs, alcohol, and so on. These have consequences that are serious, in addition to whatever the factual consequences are. Now we live in a post, you can look at this country, there used to be 98% of people believed in God. Now it's down to something like 85%. Even though we're largely unchurched now, people still believe in some kind of higher power for the most part. But now we're on our own. And what is it to be unmoored? We're unmoored in a way. What matters to us? It's my football team winning. It's my can I get more gigabytes per month on my cell phone without breaking my butt? I mean, what is at stake? What are our lives about? And I think part of the practice of, when you go back to your point, Kurt, about engaging in practices to let things show up moment by moment.
Yeah.
So you learn your own, how you make yourself crazy simply by observing the stuff that you're that's coming up, and you're staying with it and letting it drive you crazy. This type of practice is sorely missing. Who does this, right?
Right.
And without it, we're prey to big advertising, big computing, the latest distraction coming at us from our cell phones, and we're defenseless. These things are much more powerful than an ordinary person's capacity for paying attention.
Well, I wanted to, what I'm hearing also a very cool connection to this, to looking at worldview as a future giving our being in the present.
Yeah.
And I think, Michael, you kind of aptly described using the word karma as a little touchstone, the traditionalist worldview, that there is a truth beyond that. My job is to live in conformity with that. If I'm a traditionalist, if I'm, and that if you're not, then my job is to correct you, and then we, of course, then there's a modernist worldview that breaks away from the tradition, that seeks out individual liberty, undergoing adventure, making new vistas, making a difference.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm just kind of being shorthand with this just to have something to talk, to work with. And the postmodern, which is lots of things to say about that, but one would be the sort of dominant, the critical view of the traditional and the modern as excluding the marginalized, and how do we and bringing justice, correction to the extravagance of the modern and traditional in their forgetfulness of those that are destroyed or cast aside in the pursuit of.
Well, let me ask about that, because why does it matter? Why should I care? Why should I care that the marginalized are suffering? That's their problem.
Well, that would be from a modernist point of view.
Well, even the postmodern point of view. In other words, why the ranking? Isn't it the hierarchy of some lives are better than others? Well, then everyone should be brought up to this higher. I mean, what is the basis for the standard? See, I'm criticizing the postmodern.
Right.
Postmodernism it just becomes unmoored and draws upon previous stages of human life, like the karmic world, the traditional world, or the modern world. It imports those values sort of sub rosa, and then applies them now with this new inclusiveness and so on. Without those previous ones, though, there's no motivation to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Why be inclusive? because if the excluded are going to suffer. Well, why does that matter? Well, then you got to go back to the karmic world, right?
Well, then
Because
there's an integrity to all these worldviews.
right. And really, you should, all three of them need to be nurtured and respected, right? You know, when you're growing up, you need to have a karmic worldview. When you're a kid, right? You got to do things with your mom, otherwise you're in trouble with mom and dad or whatever. In a modern worldview, now you're going to get in trouble with the law, right? In fact, you've read about reality therapy, haven't you? You know about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
William
So
Blattner.
yeah, the reality therapy, and there's plenty of people in the world who don't really get that there are guardrails that if you jump over them or crash through them, you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
And that part of reality therapy is, look, here's how you got to handle yourself. You know, if the police are coming your way, don't start yelling at them, throwing bricks at them. Just shut your mouth and let them do their thing, and then keep going with your business. Otherwise, something bad is going to happen. And so the basics of how to function in a modern society, in other words, how do you get along with the law, with the expectations, trying to hold a job, showing up on time for your work shift. I mean, this is living according to the imposition that reality places upon us. A modern person is not just free to do whatever he or she wants, right?
Right.
A modern person has to, there are norms, there are rules, schedules, and so on. You have to, now you can try to live outside of that, but you're going to live a life that's not going to typically work very well. Now, what are the guardrails for a postmodern life? Where do they come from?
Well, I get it. They come from a traditional and modernist background.
To some extent. Now they're made then what a lot of previously unappreciated, underappreciated people, and now animals too, right? Get brought into the sphere of what counts, whose suffering counts, and what is my obligation to these people. But then you got to go all the way back to Plato's Republic, right? This is the beginning of this conversation, and that is, why isn't justice just the interest of those who are stronger? Right? The powerful should just be able to get away with whatever they can. Why should someone else attempt to put a curb on that? Why is justice something besides the interest of the stronger? Right. Now, this seems to me to be the opening conversation. Right now, we see the interest of the stronger in these people who are in these high-tech corporations, Google, the list, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. OpenAI and so on. These people have a power of a kind we can't even imagine, and the wealth is unimaginable. Now, do you think they really care about the consequences of harvesting all of our activity on our smartphones and computers that they use without, if you ever read all that scroll down permission stuff, you got to say yes to it.
Nobody reads that.
No one reads it, and there's some bad stuff in there, man. You're just giving it all away, so the question becomes, what kind of political, moral, ethical guidelines, guardrails, if you will, are we operating in accordance with? Who even? I mean,
and where did they come from?
Where did they come from?
Right. Why it's so rich. So in correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, but it seems to be in the traditional viewpoint, they came from God or some superior power, the arbiter of which is the priesthood. And everyone is kept in line by fear of what happens, eternal damnation, hell, right? I mean, that's a pretty strong
or
you won't get tenure
in line.
That's a negative. Absolutely. That's
yeah.
But the other side of that is forgiveness.
Right.
The idea that God is you're going to be forgiven for all that bad stuff you did. Right. And you have to do your best not to do that bad stuff. But then there's the hope. This is the basis of faith. Look at all these in the three monotheisms. It's all about God is merciful. Because, everyone looks around and knows how hard it is just to stay on the straight and narrow. Everyone knows that they've engaged in acts of betrayal, lying, deceit, corruption, theft of various kinds, sexual immorality. I mean, these sinning, whatever you want to call it, is widespread, I've noticed. And everyone, this is one of the things about being dragged down in melancholy, because you look back upon, gee, if only I hadn't said that, right? That stupid thing I said, it maybe have ruined that person's life or whatever, And so one of the promises of those theistic traditions is that God is not going to condemn you to hell without a serious opportunity for mercy, compassion. And so it's not just the fear of hell, it's also the idea that there's a way out. Now it depends on how the tradition you're raised in. If you're in
absolutely
hell and
right, absolutely right, exactly what I was thinking.
It's all
you
fear.
don't want to be part of the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church, because unless you're
that's a tough one.
oh,
Then God's forgiveness is totally arbitrary. Right? You never know who's going to. No one merits it, and who knows? Maybe he'll have a bad day and not bring anyone in.
Well, yeah, being a sinner in the hands of an angry God, right?
That's right, Jonathan Edwards.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I guess what I'm seeing is that there's a confluence or integrity to the what we would call separate. The worldviews are not quite separate. They're always in some kind of
tangled
entanglement, right, or relationship or weave,
right.
And so whatever it is that I am in this given moment is really just in a way, as an analogy, I'm just a location of cross currents, in a given moment.
That's true.
And so sometimes I mostly lean postmodern, but that doesn't deny my own the traditional and modernist sort of background and impulses that guide impulses or who I am in the present. So even my own commitment to engaging in ontological inquiry or having ontological inquiry be included as central to the mission of the university, let's say, that in itself is kind of like a articulation of a traditionalist value into a modernist enterprise called the university. Sure. But at the same time providing a postmodern critique so that the worst of that inclusion doesn't actually, in other words, it's not about making it great again, but actually allowing for diversity and inclusion, inequity, which is, by the way, another way to say integrity, a world that works for everyone with no one left out. So in any case, I'm just sort of bringing that anybody anywhere has access to being is really the fundamental big picture that I'm pointing to.
Well, it's a big picture thing, isn't it? I think about, we navigate among these pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. It's reminiscent for philosophers of the three major types of ethical theories. One is you got to do the right thing because it's your duty. It doesn't matter the consequences, or that your friends aren't going to like you because of you turning them in because they robbed a bank or whatever. You got to, what's your duty? You got to do it. That would be Kantian deontology, where the main thing is duty-bound ethics. And another one is what was counter to that, and which Kant resisted, was a kind of utilitarianism. That is to say, a good deed is one that creates pleasure. A bad deed is one that creates pain. And so to lead a good life is to promote the best sense of pleasure and well-being, and to minimize suffering on the part of human beings. And then, of course, animals later on were brought in too. Now, that's a very different type and the third one would be Aristotelian virtue ethics, that the way in which to lead a morally upright life is to cultivate your own virtues, such as courage, such as truth-telling, such as moderation in all things, such as friendship, cultivating and supporting friendship and your friends, and so on. That these are practices, virtuous practices. By the way, virtue comes in the term arete in Greek, which means excellence. So to be virtuous means to be excellent, an excellent human being, someone with friends, someone who tells the truth, who's courageous, who's moderate in all things, who's all into civic virtue, because that's part of what it means to be a good person, and so on. Now, again, these are three totally different, and everybody who, even if you've never heard of these, everyone's familiar with what the implications of these are and calls upon them. Some situations you're going to say, I got to do my duty, right? Other situations, well, I got to weigh if what I do here is what the outcome, and what if I do this, how many people will suffer, so now you got your utilitarianism, which is, and the virtue ethics, then it's really a matter of knowing
Commitment.
what is the excellent thing to do here. Now, one of the really cool things that Heidegger talked about, his most important philosopher for him was Aristotle, and Aristotle had this concept of the phronemos. This was phronesis is practical wisdom. I mean, a wisdom having to do with what's the right thing to do in a circumstance. Now, some people are gifted with it. In other words, a situation is calling. You've been in a situation where something's called for. Right now, a lot of us get flustered. We're kind of not quite sure how to handle this, but someone who's gifted with this knows just what to do. Not too much, not too little, but just the right thing to have the situation resolved in a way that works in some sense. Now, since most of us are not gifted in that way, we're raised with a series of injunctions. Don't lie, don't cheat, do your homework, respect your elders. And so you cultivate good habits, so that for the most part, you're just going to do the right thing because that's how you were taught. And that's why if young children fail to get this inculcation, then they're really going to have a hard time in life, because they don't have a bunch of go-to positions in the matter, where they're used to doing the right thing. They deviate from it, sure, but they know there's a center of gravity there they need to pay attention to. But this whole idea of doing what's called for, how can you do that? Now, here I think of this leadership course. Now, what is it about? It is about, leadership is about being so wide open to what's actually happening. In other words, to get cleared out so you can actually notice what's showing up in the context, not just about what's showing up in your mind and feelings and all this, what's happening in the situation, so that you then can take a leadership role, that is to say, to make recommendations for action that are going to have the right outcome. And that's skillful. Some people are really good at that. They don't even need to take a leadership course because they're just gifted with that. That's why they often are where they are. Others of us need some coaching about that. And the coaching largely comes down to learning to pay attention. It goes back to the practice of paying attention to what's happening in the situation so that you can respond to what's wanted and needed. Otherwise, you don't notice that anything's wanted or needed. I mean, how many times do you come home, if you're married, you're so preoccupied with whatever nonsense you're bringing home, this and that, you don't even notice that your wife is obviously having a hard time with your husband who's kind of despondent. You're just doing your thing and don't even notice. So that capacity to bring you're coming in to home. Right, what are you going to bring home with you? How about paying attention to what's going on at home and setting aside that other stuff for a little later? Don't bring it in the door with you, right? So that's why in my courses before I retired, I always had that meditation period, so that people could set down the stuff they were bringing into class, like a briefcase, and put it down next to their desk, right? Put that there, and let's be here in class, so that we can see what's wanted and needed, and what's the opportunity for learning here, and not bring into class all the stuff that you were talking about and worried about before you entered.
So I just want to say something real quick about that, but I also want to check in with Carolyn. But the first thing I want to say is that phronesis as a with, I think it's called exis or hexis, which is disposition. I don't know if you correct me if I'm wrong about that, Michael, but that basically, like, how do you cultivate, through coaching or ontological inquiry, like this possibility of phronesis, which is, one way to define it, for the audience here would be a kind of a receptivity to what's so,
Right.
that allows for whatever it is that I am as a commitment or a word to manifest or be brought into existence, that deals precisely with the details of what's so.
That's right. And the key here is discernment, to be able to discern. Right. I think now Aristotle also talked about, I think one extension of this, some people just have better taste. Think about, I think of my wife, for example. I mean, my wife is so gifted, so many ways. Thank God I don't have to think, I work hard, but thank goodness she's in charge of a lot of the food. Even though I do a lot of food prep and cleaning up, I do occasional cooking, but her taste is so good in terms of things. For example, and I'm just using her as an example, that she can discern what type of outfit, what would have to go with an outfit to make it a good looking outfit. Right. Now, there are plenty of men and women who don't have that. I see plenty of people. It's not necessarily a gender thing, although women often pay more attention. But there's plenty of women who don't pay much attention or whatever, for whatever reason. But paying attention to noticing allows for discernment. Now, some people are gifted with this. This is Aristotle's point. And this is why which can virtue be taught? Which is that which dialogue of Plato is that? Is it the Philo or one of the early dialogues? Can you teach excellence? Can you teach? And it doesn't look like you can do much. How would you teach it? You can encourage it. You can put people on the right path. You can create opportunities, but it's not necessarily going to happen that everyone's going to be capable of excellence in human life. So that's true for us. Again, that's why the training your children to notice that there are certain guardrails. You can't be jumping over these. You can't be lying and stealing and cheating. And for young people, adolescents, and young people getting in trouble, that's why the military used to be such a good thing. Sending a young man or young woman into the military and getting that for 8 weeks, you are the slave of this sergeant, and anything he says, you got to jump, right? Because there are consequences. See that 1,000 potatoes over there? You're going to be here and peel every one of them. The next time you do that, I want to do that X that got you in here, maybe you won't do it. And it's amazing the development of self-discipline. Now, a crucial factor here, and I think this is especially true for young men. Now, my grasp of female psychology isn't the same as my understanding of men. So women would have to, in the audience, or would need to address this in the right way. But for young men, there's a certain type you have to submit to a proper authority. You have to get what that's about. That's why coaches are so important in young men's lives, right? That you have to submit to what the coach tells you, because he or she can see stuff about you that you can't see. And he can see, or she can see, when you're getting in your own way, when you're not really putting out the effort, blah, blah, blah. And the more you're willing to submit to the coaching, to learning from someone who actually knows more than you do about something, the greater you develop a type of discipline. And that's when you start to excel. That's when the native ability turns into real performance. When you've been able to internalize the coaching, having submitted to that, then you can become your own man. And because now you know how to create the discipline needed to achieve.
Interesting. So Michael, one of just a little layer to that is, going back to this thing that we were discussing before about the word that I am, and, what it is to be committed to that. There's a kind of submission to that.
Yes.
Like what it is to, in that's, so there's I guess you're calling that self-discipline.
Right.
But it's sort of, I would call it a little bit a word discipline, because it's not really, it's not quite mine, it's not quite others, it's sort of just this, again, where is it and when is it, this word that I am that's guiding my life, or that's guiding my action in this given moment.
Right.
But anyway, I just wanted to just double check, because we have 10 minutes left in our time, and I wanted to just see, Caroline, there's so much that just happened, and I was actually kind of listening many, many times to what you might be thinking and saying, and I want to make sure that you have some opportunity to take it in whatever direction you'd like to go.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I grew up in a very fundamentalist Mormon family. And so the conversation about training is problematic for me. And it's problematic in the way that it was actually in New Orleans when I discovered, when I was working as a secretary. Now, I was a secretary because I hated high school. I hated junior high school. I did the least amount of work possible. Now, and I became a secretary, right? But my good fortune was to become the secretary for an Upward Bound program, where I worked with Navajo and Hopi students. And working with them invited me to begin to think, if I think an education's good for them, why do I not think it's good for me? So now I get to New Orleans and I'm working as a secretary down at Adler's Jewelry Store on Canal Street, right?
Yeah, right.
And I meet this woman, Mike Rosoff, who gives me my first feminist book. And the world is never the same. I read that book and it gives me a new worldview.
Yes.
To look at all the things I made up about who I was in the world, who I could be in the world. And I got really pissed off, right? So now I decide I'm absolutely going to go back to school. And I'm going to right the wrongs of this mythology that I bought into, right? So that led to me leaving the Mormon church. That led to me, of course, you can predict getting a divorce, because it wasn't a lot of room for this new version of who was showing up. But before all that, but what happened in the way was I had my son. My son was already born. And then I got pregnant with my daughter. And for me, abortion was not an option. Now, my daughter became, when we moved to Southern Illinois, he graduated from Tulane. There were no natural childbirth classes in Southern Illinois where we were living at the time. I read books to teach myself how to have natural childbirth. So the birth of my daughter became this pivotal moment of me making the connection between reading, learning, and action in the world. And more than that, probably the most miraculous thing I ever experienced, right? So now, what I want to do is fast forward to after my master's degree, I got hired back to that Upward Bound program to direct it. And in the middle of the summer, we were heavily invested in discipline because we were living in a small Mormon community in Southern Utah with a lot of indigenous students and all the mythologies about the drunken Indian, right? So now, how do we navigate all of this? And the only way I could run that program was to tell the students, higher education is not designed for you and your culture, so you've got to learn to negotiate. And that was the keystone for our program: negotiation, not self-discipline, not buying into what the university was saying was the truth, but rather negotiating every part of your experience. Right. So it's the end of the summer we have a student government. The students run the student government. The student, Edmund, comes to me, Navajo student. He says, they called me CJ. He said, CJ, I want to negotiate. We're getting ready to go on a weekend camping trip. And when I hear that word negotiate, I know I'm in for something, right? So he says, we have this rule that when students go out and drink and come back to the dorm, these were high school students, right? They come back to the dorm, they get kicked out of the program. But what I noticed is we're not helping the students to think that through. We're not taking care of each other. We're not standing for each other. Could we modify our rules if as students we're willing to say we're going to be a stand for helping each other to keep the rules? So we do this conversation on the lawn in front of the dormitory that goes round and round, you know, for a couple of hours, hearing everybody's perspective. And a lot of perspectives start to shift. So the students finally say, we want to try this. Now what happened was we tried it. And what I noticed was that night when we, or a few days later when we came back and we had a dance, usually at the dances, the boys would be on one side of the room, the girls would be on the other, you know, like surviving the social space. But instead at that dance, they were together, they were feeling like they were having fun, they were present, they were empowered. And then somebody came to me and said, so-and-so's left the dance and is going to go out and get in trouble and they're going to break the rules. What should I do? And I said, well, you're the one that has the power now. What are you going to do? Right? So they go out and talk to the student and the student still does what they do, right? Well, the students were smart enough, and these are high school students, they were smart enough to figure out that they could take a stand for something, but the other person had to agree to it also. So when those students got sent home, because they chose to break the rules in spite of the community, there was no pushback, there was no argument from the students. They were like totally on board. And but the community that we were able to create out of that space was phenomenal. A friend came to visit the program and said, are you drugging these students? They're so happy. What are you doing, right? They're so happy. They're learning, they're developing, they're just, you know. But what I'm pointing to is, and what I kept thinking about in our conversation is we're living in a world now where we need new ways of doing everything, right? And so students might have finished the program and done okay going by the rules as they were set, but when they have the opportunity to try out new things, to discover for themselves what works and what doesn't work, there's a whole new human being over there, right? And that goes back to, I think for me, reading that feminist book was like discovering for myself, right? I had to discover for myself that I wasn't who I thought I was, right? But nobody could tell me that. They tried, I couldn't hear it, right? And so that's just a little bit of what's been going on over here. So I'll stop there.
That is so great. Thank you. It reminds me of that you can't tell anybody anything.
No.
They have to figure it out on their own. And now that ability, the opportunity to figure out on their own, it's easier maybe to do that if you're not in jail or a drug addict. The story you're telling about these high school students, I mean, it's in high school that people are starting to try out things.
Yeah.
Right. They're stepping outside of the rules their parents taught them. And to have a support network is really vital. I remember reading recently about this group of 4 or 5 college students. They're really good friends. And they made this commitment. If one of us cannot drop out of this night and go off alone and get drunk or something, if she leaves, we're all leaving. And so that's that kind of mutual support commitment is really important in all stages of life, but especially that transitional stage where you need a kind of deep friendship where you feel like you got a net There's somebody going to be there for you. And that means that I got to be there for her too. It can't just be for me.
Mhm.
It's like that the kids who went home willingly because they had broken the rules. They couldn't complain about it. They had agreed, right? And so that's a beautiful story. Well, good for you. By the way, the
Well,
Barbie movie apparently is all about Barbie's discovery of patriarchy and her resistance to it.
Yeah.
Uh,
The woke,
yeah,
which yeah, I will probably be seeing that in a week or so.
yeah,
Yeah.
me too. No,
Yeah. Well, well, with that, we are at the end of our time. Is there anything else that we need to say to wrap things up? Kurt, do you have anything?
Well, just there, like the last call, there's so many open threads. I feel like, we
Well-
could do this for months. I mean, and we
yeah,
hardly touched on artificial intelligence.
yeah, we didn't
Oh
get
yeah,
there.
yeah. We're like, hey, let's talk about that.
Yeah, right. Which, and I got lots of, there's lots of avenues, but that's delightful, completely delightful being with you, Michael, and
Oh, no, for you all,
and
I mean,
lots of
it's a
threads.
great opportunity. How many opportunities do we have just to spend an hour and a half sitting around and talking about these things that matter to us?
Hmm.
And that's, well, if you, again, going back, what was life like before we had any electronic distractions? People would sit around a campfire, chatting, singing, thinking about deep thoughts, watching the stars and figuring out how they all worked. I mean, the human mind was put into different use. And a lot of it was a smaller communal activity. It looks like human beings are really, really good at tribal, about 100, 150 people. We're really good at that. And we don't get, once we start getting it to 100, 150, 15, 20 million people together in a city, it's tougher, so.
Well, this is a good four square spot here for us to gather, and
Yeah.
and having using technology to have a conversation arise that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So
That's right.
thanks for
Put the good
coming.
uses too.
Yeah, yeah.